Great. So I just want to extend a warm welcome to everybody who will be watching this series of interviews that I've planned for this year. The whole intention is to introduce you to thought leaders. We have Lisette Sutherland with us, and she'll be explaining, who she is and what she does and everything. But I'm wanting to have people like Lisette with us to just open the minds of business people around us to understand the potential that technology has now made possible for businesses. So let's kick right into this, Lisette. Maybe you can just tell everybody, who you are and where you're at and what you are busy with at this point in time.
Oh man. Okay. We'll start small. So my name is Lisette, and I am an American living in the Netherlands for the last 10 years. I run a company called Collaboration Superpowers, which helps other companies work better together remotely through a series of online or in-person workshops. So I always encourage the online workshop, because if you want to learn how to work remote, well then let's do it remote. That's always the best way. I'm also, what a lot of people don't know is I'm also the remote office manager of a small team for a company called Management 3.0. And we have people all the way from Canada to India, South Sudan, Finland. So from all over the world, a small team. But I liked what it does. I don't have to do it, but I like the team so much. But what it does is it keeps me really humble, because then I get to practice what I preach. And I find it's really easy to get on stage and say, this is how to do remote working well. But to actually do it well is another story. So those are sort of the two aspects of what I do.
Right. So I have a quick question for you. So you're based in the Netherlands, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, awesome. Now, Lisette, I mentioned to you before we started the recording here that I've been following, the things that you share on social media, etc. And recently, you published a book, and the book is entitled "Work Together Anywhere: A Handbook on Working Remotely Successfully for Individuals, Teams, and Managers." Talk to me a little bit about the book. What is the book about? We are going to, for everybody that's watching, there will be a link in the comments here to Lisette's book, which I really highly encourage you to read, because it does open one's mind to the possibilities. But talk to us a little bit about the book and how it came about and what it's all about.
Well, it started, I'll try to keep the short version of the story. So it started about 15 years ago. I was working for an online project management company, and my job was to research all the online project management tools. But what was so interesting is that the CEO of the company was building this project management tool because he didn't want to die. And he was frustrated that longevity scientists from all over the world weren't communicating and collaborating with each other and sharing data. And he really wanted to solve the problem of aging. And he really believed that he could solve it. And my mind, when he was telling me about his vision, my mind got kind of blown immediately. And I thought, what else could we do if we could just get the right people working together? Like, my God, we could solve global warming. We could cure cancer. Just think of the things we could do. And it sort of started me down the path. So I started interviewing companies who were working remotely, because I wanted to understand how they were doing it well. And in the beginning, it was just out of curiosity. And then I told people I was writing a book so that they would talk to me. I would say, oh, yeah, I'd like to interview you for my book. I wasn't actually intending to write the book. But then it turns out there was a lot of interest in the book, and people started asking me about the book. And I thought, oh, no, now I have to write it. I mean, enough people started asking that I really felt pressured into writing it. So that's how it all started. And it says for individuals, teams, and managers, because I feel that the power of remote working is when we can understand each other's perspectives and when we understand each other. So individuals need to understand where managers are coming from and what their perspective is. And at the same time, managers need to understand what we as individuals struggle with so that they can help us to succeed on teams. So it's written from these different angles, because everybody has a part to play in sort of a successful remote working organization.
Excellent. So I want to ask you, if from your experience and the companies that you've worked with, etc., if just from a high level perspective, what would you say are the major building blocks that need to be in place in order for organizations to have remote teams or distributed teams?
I would say the number one thing is making communicating easy. So, and I mean like Star Trek easy. So I don't know, on Star Trek, for those that don't know, you have a little communicator on your chest and you can just hit the communicator and the captain from anywhere on the ship can call anybody on the ship and they respond immediately. So it's just Picard to Riker and Riker from wherever he is can respond. And on remote teams, that tends to be a little bit more difficult. We want to schedule appointments with each other and, hey, can you talk next Wednesday? And it's hard to get in touch with each other. And that's the kind of thing we want to end. We want to make it really easy, just like leaning over and asking the question to the person next to you. So setting that up, I would say the next part of that would be, how do we work out loud? How do we know what each other are doing and sort of creating that camaraderie? And how can we be present on the team? So there's these three critical components that need to be put in place. None of it is rocket science, but we do need to make it deliberate. I know a lot of people go out and say, oh, remote working, how hard can it be? I can be in my pajamas and, we're working from the beach. It looks really luxurious and easy, but actually there's a lot to it, and that we really just need to pay attention and be deliberate about the things that we do. And I think that's where it breaks down a little bit, is people think it's easy, and then they go off and we try to work online as if we were in the office, but it's a different style of working. So it's not that it's harder, but it is different. And those differences is what we need to pay attention to.
And this is one thing for everybody that does end up getting hold of Lisette's book, which, as I mentioned, I highly encourage you to do. You will notice these nuances that she's mentioned now in the book as well. So you're absolutely right. This is something that needs to be strategically thought through. But once you've done that work, then it's a matter of just gaining the skill to do so. You mentioned something quite interesting now, and I know I've spoken about this too, and so have lots of people. In your mind, the concept of working out loud, what is that? How would you define that?
Well, I would say, we can often be out of sight, out of mind. And, on a remote team, we don't see each other very often unless we've really got video presence, which is pretty rare on Teams. So working out loud just lets others know what we're doing. So that could be having a asynchronous chat channel like Slack, for instance, or Stride, or some of these other tools, so that we can see what each other are working on. It can be working in a virtual office like Sakoko you mentioned, where you actually can see where your remote workers are on a virtual floor plan. Or it can be using telepresence technology, for example, where you can beam into a drivable robot and drive yourself around the office and attend meetings. So it's really just a matter of how can we be more present to our remote colleagues so that we're not out of sight, out of mind. Because once we're out of sight, we start making assumptions, disconnections grow, trust gets broken very easily. And we don't often, when somebody's not responding, we don't often make a positive assumption about it. It's usually something negative because we don't know. It's like if your children don't call when they say they're going to be, you don't think like, oh, I'm sure they're just having so much fun. You automatically think of all the million things that could have possibly happened. And that's what we want to avoid on a remote team. So the more that we can see what each other are doing, the better the collaboration is, the richer the collaboration is.
And obviously that takes a bit of skill, right? Because, normally if people come into a physical office, that they may go into their office if they have their own closed offices and they're busy there, and no one necessarily knows what they're actually doing with that. And now what you have to do is learn the skill of actually making your work visible so that people can see what you're working on. Okay, so I have another quick question that I'd like to ask you. In your experience, having been helping companies, etc., could you perhaps share one or two great examples of organizations that are doing this really well?
So I can share a couple of, there's some very popular ones. One is, of course, WordPress. So they have hundreds of people all over the world, and they've recently closed down their San Francisco headquarters because it wasn't getting used and it wasn't necessary. They have hundreds of people around the world, and they are all totally aligned around the same goal and working well. And they've got one of the most popular websites in the world. I think it's like number 3 in terms of visits out there. And they have a very lean team. I think it's around 300 people. I'd have to look at the numbers again. So it's a fairly lean team for a website of that size. And I would say that they're doing it extremely well. But there are hundreds of littler companies out there who are also doing it. Zapier is a company that I recently interviewed. They have 200 plus people without any office whatsoever. There's FormStack in Indianapolis, who it's a pretty popular company for those who know what it is. But they grew because they couldn't find any more people within Indianapolis. Like the company was growing, but they couldn't find any more people locally, so they had to go remote. But then I would also say, Management 3.0, the company that I work for, that I've been working for, pretty astounding, not just because it's the company that I work for, but I have to say I'm very impressed because we have people from all kinds of different cultures and religions and viewpoints all coming together and somehow superseding all of the differences that we have and still making it work. And I'm particularly impressed because we had an in-person meeting just this last week. We meet twice a year in person for goal setting and team building. And it was really noticeable on the team how many different cultures there were. So I was just so impressed by how all those differences can still come together and work towards a common goal.
I saw the guys from TED released I think it's like a 2-minute little interview that they did with Matt Mullenweg of Automatic and WordPress, and that they released last week sometime, and where he talks about their experience as an organization. But I do want to just ask you something that you just mentioned now, and that is the importance of occasional in-person, face-to-face meetings. What role does that play in this whole thing about distributed teams and remote work?
I used to be completely opposed to the idea, at least on the Management 3.0 team, because I thought, I love remote working, I love virtual, we can totally make this work without meeting. And then we decided as a team, well, let's get together just once and see how that goes. And we met in Lisbon for the first time. And after the team meeting during the day one, it was really great to meet people in person because, wow, you're way taller than I expected, or, these things. So it brought out a different dynamic. And then we went out on the town together as a team one night, and we went to the bars and we hung out and we ended up dancing in the street. And the bonding that came from just one night out together convinced me of the importance of getting together in person once in a while. I mean, virtually we were okay, we were doing great, but after the meeting in person and having that experience of just being out together, it sealed us and bonded us in a way that was not happening virtually. So I have to say, yeah, meeting in person every once in a while, whether it's once per quarter, once per 6 months, can do a lot. There's nothing like hanging out over a plate of nachos together. You just can't do that virtually. And so a lot of times I tell companies, listen, I'm not here to say that remote is so much better and you have to go remote. But I do think that you have to have the processes in place to be able to go remote and to be able to offer that flexibility to workers. It just makes your business more robust and less vulnerable to outside forces. And I'm not opposed to meeting in person anymore. I think it's a really valuable thing. So it's not a deal breaker, but yeah, it sure is fun if you have the right team. It sure is fun. So I'm really for it.
Great. So I know the other organization that also has a pretty robust remote team are the team from Buffer, and I know they have sometimes come to South Africa. They've come to Cape Town on a retreat. I think they were here for a week or so, and you saw all their updates, etc. But it does have its place, I think, and as you say, and sometimes what happens is organizations need to understand that if they do something as radical as WordPress, where they don't have any offices, there is always the possibility of getting together once a quarter, whatever the case may be, just for those physical bonds to be there. Talking about that, I want to ask you, in your view, what role does video communication, very similar to what we're having now, play in a distributed team?
So this is somewhat controversial, but I think video communication is crucial on a remote team. You're missing out on so much. We as humans are visually, we're sort of programmed to be visual with each other, and there's all kinds of cues that we can use. It's like you miss out. So I can say like, oh, okay, you're frozen, or you're on mute, or oh my gosh, that was awesome. So there's all these things that we can use visually, but also just to be able to look somebody in the eyes and to have a conversation. It creates a whole level of empathy that you can't get. And in the old days, like the 1980s, I would say is old days, we had these spider phones on conference room tables, and a lot of people are still using them. I would say, the majority of companies that I speak to are still using these old spider phones, and you're leaning over and it's, hey, Bob, it's Lisette. Can you hear me? And that was great for the 80s because that was the best we had, and it was better than nothing. But we now have great video technology, and I really feel like we should be using them. A lot of people don't like turning their cameras on because they feel like it's very personal, and maybe they want to be in their yoga clothes. And I say, listen, it's time. If you're going to work professionally remotely, then be a professional. Put on your professional shirt. You can still work in your pajama bottoms if you want to. Put on your professional shirt and show up to work and be present with your colleagues. But to me, video is crucial. I know it's not needed 100% of the time, but you're missing out on so much without it. So much.
That's a great observation. Great observation. Now, I know that because you very much are involved in this space, you're obviously tracking what's happening around the world, especially in the conversation that's happening related to the future of work. At the moment in Davos in Switzerland, you've got the World Economic Forum event that's taking place, and there's huge conversation around the future of work. So I want to ask you, if I think back to when we lived in the city, and as I mentioned to you, we recently moved into a very quiet environment, but very close to nature, and it's been an incredible experience. But it hasn't given our business a hiccup because most of our consulting and everything that we do gets done like this via video. I wanted to ask you, so sorry, I was going to say to you, so I recall being in the city, and I'm sure in the Netherlands you have the same. You in the mornings, you have these large volumes of people that get onto the highways to commute to work. And I just want to just get a feel for what you think. Where are we headed as far as the workplace is concerned, physical workplaces, and where is this whole concept of digital workplaces and remote teams going to fit into the future, do you think?
Well, I don't think offices are going away, nor do I think they should go away. To me, what I think the future holds is options for flexibility. So, for example, most people love having a hybrid schedule. The majority of people out there want to spend a few days in the office and a few days at home. And I think really the majority of people want the option to work where they're most productive or in order to avoid the commute. Yesterday in the Netherlands, we had a major snowstorm. And when I saw the traffic reports on the news of what people had to go to get to work, I thought, this is insanity. Why are we risking our lives to go to an office when people could stay home and get the same amount of work done? So to me, the future is not having offices go away or that everybody is remote. The future is choice. We should be able to choose where we're most productive and to be able to work where we're most productive. So I think one of the most compelling arguments for remote working is for companies to become remote first, which is whether or not you plan to allow for people to work remotely, you should have the processes in place to be able to work remotely in case there's a bad snowstorm or your kids are sick at home. We don't have to be dependent on a particular location for and able to get the work done. I think it just only makes your business stronger to be able to put that in place.
Which now brings me to the one final topic that I wanted to just have your insights on. So what impact does distributed teams and the ability to work from anywhere, as you mentioned in your book title, what does that do to the availability of skills for your business or for you as a person who may be in the market for a job?
Well, it opens up your options significantly. I mean, when you can make remote working work, the sky's the limit. So yeah, you have to do some work to get everything in place. I'm not going to say it's easy. It is not easy. You have to have the correct infrastructure. You have to have team agreements in place. There's definitely things that you have to do. But once you open that up, I would say, I mean, if I had to look for a job these days, I could look for a job anywhere, right? There are companies all over the world who are offering remote positions. So I would be able to find a job that I loved the most, which is great for an employer because I'm bringing a level of enthusiasm and joy to the workplace that you can't get from, somebody who doesn't really like their job, but they need it. So they're going to go in every day because, well, they need the paycheck. I mean, you're not going to get that a level of innovation and joy from somebody that needs that job. For somebody that wants the job and has the skills to contribute, you're going to get something totally different. From an employer's perspective, you now have, instead of just your local area, you can now look for people almost anywhere. I would say stick closer to your time zones. The further out you go into various time zones, the more difficult it is. And I think it gets sort of exponential the further out that you go, depending on the structure and the type of work that it is. But I would say stick closer to your time zones. But for example, you're in South Africa now and I'm in the Netherlands. We're very far apart distance-wise, but time zone-wise, it's only 1 hour. And that is very
Ideal.
doable. Absolutely ideal. It's almost like being in the very same times. I mean, 1 hour, that's nothing. That's nobody has to get up early or stay up late for that. So yeah, I mean, given that your employment pool opens up and you can now get the most qualified worker with the most enthusiasm for the job. And I think for companies, that's invaluable. That's what you want. You want somebody who wants to be there, who is excited about getting up for the job every day. So for me, it's a win-win on both levels.
Fantastic. So Lisette, thank you so much for the time that you've spent here talking to us about this. And, obviously, as I mentioned before, if they want to read more about your thinking around this topic, your book is the place to go. But just one other quick question. Where are you the most active socially on the social web?
I love Twitter, and more I love LinkedIn. In the beginning, it was sort of a weird resume place, but now LinkedIn has really become the place to go to have professional conversations. And I'm finding more and more that LinkedIn is an extremely valuable place. So yeah, Twitter, I love Twitter because it's just streams of information and I get to pick and choose and filter, and I meet a shocking amount of people on Twitter. But LinkedIn for really in-depth conversations, that's the place I love. A little bit
Correct.
old-fashioned, it's not Instagram or Snapchat or anything like that, but still, that's where I like it.
But my prediction is it won't be long before LinkedIn has the story feature as well on their app.
Yeah, exactly.
Lisette, what I'm going to do for everybody, I'm going to in the comments of this when we release this interview will be the link to your book, the link to your Twitter account, as well as your LinkedIn page, and people can connect with you there and continue the conversation. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the time that you put aside for us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here.
Great. So I'm going to end the recording, and then I would like to just ask you to stay on for us. Then we can just have a quick final chat. Thanks, Lisette.
Sounds great.